I would not be here today in front of you if it wasn't for climate change. I was born out of climate change. My father came here as a refugee from Ethiopia, and the reason he had to leave was largely because of climate change. My grandfather worked directly under Haile Selassie, the last emperor of the 3,000-year-old Ethiopian monarchy. My father left Ethiopia the day before Selassie was killed in the 1975 military coup. He was murdered because his people were unhappy with his actions as king, and more specifically, how he failed to deal with the famine of 1973 through 75. Selassie's failure to address this environmental disaster led to an estimated 200,000 lives being lost, which was one of the main causes for the uprising. The famine of 73 through 75 was a result of desertification, which caused the extension of the Sahara Desert into the agricultural lands and rendered them obsolete. Desertification has been increased by climate change. The drought and famine was not contained to Ethiopia, but also extended into all of the Horn of Africa and has now been ongoing for the last 20 years. Natural disasters such as these are not isolated events, because with natural disasters also come civil unrest. These areas that have been affected by droughts for the last 20 years correlate with the areas that have had civil war during the same time, including the neighboring countries of Somalia, Darfur, and Eritrea. Climate change has no borders. The natural disasters, which were intensified by climate change and resulted in war, led to massive migration. My father was one of those refugees. My dad finally settled in Seattle, Washington, where he met my mom, and years later I arrived. I was born to fight climate change, to right the wrong that forced my father out of his country and away from his family and home, just the way it has and continues to do with countless others. Radical Islam was frequently blamed as a catalyst for the Arab Spring, but it was the rising food prices that brought people out in the street. The Middle East is the largest importer of wheat. And when a once-in-a-century drought in China reduced the wheat supply, it caused food prices to rise 40% in the Middle East, making food unaffordable to many, thus setting the stage for the Arab Spring. Likewise, a 5-year drought in Syria that the Assad regime ignored caused 1.5 million farmers to leave their farms, move to the city, and cause ethnic and religious strife that in the end led to another civil war. Another example is the 200,000 farmers that were displaced from Niger and Chad due to the severe drought and famine. Many of them joined Boko Haram. Boko Haram then took advantage of the poor response from the Nigerian government to the climatic changes in Nigeria, leading to the poverty and instability that made it easy for the Boko Haram to kidnap over 200 girls and massacre more than 300 civilians. Climate change is the biggest terrorist that world has ever experienced. And this is one terrorist that America won't be able to bomb its way out of. Perhaps that's why the West has failed to address it. No amount of gunpowder or drones will solve this problem. But just because our governments have failed to address this global security threat does not mean that we can allow for this level of irresponsibility. The conflicts that climate change causes are not retained to poor countries. Climate change does not respect political or national boundaries. Weather is local, climate is global, and climate change is indiscriminate of race, nationality, or culture. Climate change does not care if you are rich or poor, black or white, Canadian or native. When disaster strikes and resources are limited, everyone is just as likely to be drawn into conflict to resolve the disparity, however unequal that resolution may turn out to be. And even though climate change threatens us equally, the results are felt unequally. People of color, women, low income, and indigenous communities are in the front lines of the disastrous effects of climate change. Those who are least responsible are most affected. As Martin Luther King Jr. once said, an injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. As a young black woman and a second-generation immigrant, fighting climate change isn't a choice. It's an obligation and a duty to protect not only my rights, but my community and generations after me. I'm a 21-year-old senior at the University of Washington who plans to continue on to get my PhD in oceanography to study the acidifying ocean caused by our excessive carbon pollution. This is especially important to me because I live next to the Salish Sea, which due to coastal upwelling has some of the most acidic pH levels in all of the oceans. Staring into a microscope at pteropods at Noah's laboratory, I had a life-changing experience. I saw with my own eyes the proof climate change is happening now. The acidification